All right. All right, DB, I think we're live.
We are.
Yeah, good. Now, just as an aside, we've got summer and there's kids outside, so we might be interrupted by some little bambinos having fun, but hopefully not. We'll get through this.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting ready for Idea World next week, and as we're preparing our sessions, we wanted to kind of share with you some of the insights that we're kind of going over right now, and we're really excited about sharing some of the different topics that we're going to explore. I think we have about, 4 or 5 sessions between the both of us.
Yeah,
sharing some sessions as well.
And we just want to thank all the folks at IDEA for having us this year, and we're really looking forward to it. There's a lot of folks that have asked us questions on the topics that we're going to deliver at IDEA World, and as DP said, this is probably a great opportunity for us just to get ahead of it and to kind of comment on some of the facets of what we might be talking about in our 4 or 5 sessions. So,
cool. Yeah. So one of our sessions we're just talking about right now is the concept of deadlifting and deadshifting mass.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to explore this topic and share some of the insights that we've gained over the years around these concepts. And I think it's important to first start off with defining what a deadlift is.
Right.
We know, we can think of what a deadlift looks like in the gym, and we know there's a lot of benefits to it, but how can we define what exactly that means?
Yeah, so a deadlift pattern is basically, it's part of a family called dead starts. And a dead start is where we are overcoming resting inertia, right? So think about, things in real life, which is people go on vacation and they grab a suitcase from a dead position. In other words, that there's no movement on it at all, right? They've got to impart a force to get that thing to move, and it's typically in an odd position. That is a dead start. Overcoming resting inertia is what we would call a dead start. Now, a dead lift is when we're lifting mass from a dead position, right? So in this case, we're going up in a field of gravity. We don't take, and you said this too, maybe you can illustrate, what is not a deadlift.
Yeah, well, we often associate a deadlift as purely a hip hinging pattern that we're moving a mass up and down from just the hip hinge. So you see people doing this, and we call these deadlifts. But I think
which is not.
It's not. By definition, it's not an actual deadlift, because the idea of the deadlift is there's a mass that has a resting inertia.
Right.
And I have to have enough strength to overcome its resting inertia to move it vertical.
Right. So if we look at this from kind of a scientific perspective, from a muscular perspective, from a purely recruitment of force perspective, we have to typically load a pattern that is a dead start, and we've got to impart mostly a concentric force production, right? Because if I go and I bend and I lift something up in a deadlift pattern, I have nothing in my hands, I've got to go get a bar in the gym. Now what I've got to do is I have now wasted my amortization phase, right? Because I can't get a lot of myotatic or kind of stretch reflex if I'm going down there, setting myself up, establishing a nice position, and then pushing vertically. That is mostly concentric. There'll be some eccentric, but not a lot. So we're not taking advantage of this load to unload. We are taking advantage of a recruitment of force that is largely concentric with minimal eccentric or elastic loading, right? So that is life. Right? Throwing a ball takes advantage of massive eccentric loading. That's great and super efficient. But not all aspects of life are that.
Right.
So from a muscular position, we would say that deadlift pattern, okay, is very different. From a neurological pattern, we need to now feed forward instead of feed back. So there's these different neurological loops that we have. Feedback is, I can anticipate, I receive some sort of sensory information, I make a motor decision, and away I go. But how many people hurt themselves when they lift things and they didn't know how much it was?
Right.
I'm helping my buddy move his TV. Right. I'm in an odd position. I don't know how much to stabilize. Right. My body has to anticipate that. And, or I go on vacation and I grab the luggage from the trunk of my car, and my body has to make a quick decision.
That's right.
In an odd position.
That's right.
On how much stability is required, because they have no reference point. My body has a zero reference point on how heavy that's going to be. In fact, we've all been in the scenario where we think it's lighter and it happens to be heavier,
right,
and it jars us, right? That is called a feed forward. We have to anticipate how much stability is required because we have no reference point. back to your hinging pattern. If I have the bar and I rack it off and I have it right here and I go down and up, my body knows exactly how much to stabilize, which is far different than a deadlift pattern, which is it's on the ground in a dead position and I've got to go get it.
That's right.
Right? So under the dead start banner, there's deadlifts, right? Which is lifting a mass from a dead position.
Yeah, and then from that, the task at hand, we think of it as a skill. In the gym, we often move that mass, that deadlift. The mass goes from here.
Hey, watch my walls.
To here. I know, I just marked your wall.
Excellent.
And I just moved it to hip height, right? And then I put it back down. That's as far as I'm moving the mass, and that's a particular task.
And you mentioned before, how many people can't get it because they lack flexibility and neural control to even get to the floor. So to get there, rounding my back and going through postures that are less effective.
Right, and then we have to teach the hinging pattern and how to push off the ground using the entire body. And so one of the benefits, I think, when you have a ViPR PRO from a reconditioning perspective to get people used to moving a mass off the ground is we would probably start it in a cylinder position. And in this vertical orientation, well, now I don't have to bend over as much. So for somebody that has, let's say, some fear around the idea of bending, but we got to recondition their body to be able to move and lift mass.
Good point.
If I start in this position, well, now I can get underneath it, but I'm not having to bend at my hip and my back, which psychologically can be a savior for that individual.
Imagine if I have a disc bulge, right? So my annular rings and the discs of the spine are compromised. And any type of flexion moment in the spine itself is going to create spinal instability. So to any degree of going down and getting it is going to put me in potential peril. Right, so there might be an apprehension there, right? So in this case, as you said, and you even alluded to some patterns, and maybe you can show us one, where you're getting in and you're actually organizing in a cylinder position. You don't have to go down as far, right? And you don't have to flex as much through the hips, but let's say they can't flex much through the hips and they're flexing through the spine at compromise. We could avoid that entire scenario as we're addressing it. In other words, all the great mobility strategies that we see out there to create an effective hinge, to create an effective squat are awesome, right? And what we don't have to do necessarily is wait for them to achieve that mobility to be able to get them, as you said, to recondition the body.
Right. And then when we're thinking of reconditioning, we're thinking about how many different positions and postures can we make this person resilient in.
Right.
Because if I'm always challenging myself here, where I have optimal length tension relationships and I have optimal force production for large amounts of mass, well, if I haven't conditioned my body and my nervous system to understand how to control different postures and different positions, there's a good chance I'll be less resilient to tolerate that force demand.
Right. From a purely mechanical perspective and neurological perspective, it makes sense. Variable tasks. When we first learn that skill, there's wide degrees of variability from a movement perspective. After we challenge all of these skills, we start to reduce the noise in the space. That is good motor control.
That's right.
Right. That does provide good resiliency to the body. Show us.
So, as we migrate from a standard bilateral position.
You're trying to get in my space.
Well, I'm just making sure I try to stay on the camera here. So we got Instagram and Facebook. So I'm being mindful of the camera, trying to be professional. So in this position, instead of tackling that bilateral position, I might go more of a split stance unilateral position. And so now I got to come down and get the mass from this position and be strong enough and sensitive enough and have enough tissue tolerance to be able to lift the mass up and down, and then be able to do so in a variety of different ways. And we can do so when we have a device that has and offers an opportunity to do so. And so what we want to do is challenge this person to be able to stay somewhat vertical, but then do so in a lot of different positions. So another position we might tackle is a wide position, where we're lifting the mass straight up, but my orientation relative to the mass is in a much different position.
Let me go back to stay in that position. Let me go back to your earlier thought, which is I cannot get down as far. What we might do is put this on a block. So now the starting position's right here, right? And that is your start position. So you're effectively creating motor control and what we would call starting strength, right? Starting strength is the ability to go concentric with not a lot of eccentric loading, which is why deadlifts in its purest definition is great for linemen in football. It's great for sprinters. It's great for parents who need to pick up their kids off the ground from a dead position, so to speak. That doesn't sound quite right. As parents, yes. So, but a child's on the ground. That mass, that child, right? Our Burke or our Jackson is on the ground, and we need to pick them up. And, unless they're jumping up towards us, there's hardly any, inertia, right? It might be other inertias going, crawling away. So we need effective motor control and tissue resiliency and strength in different positions to be able to offer up a internal environment in our bodies that our bodies can say we can organize this. We've got the skill, we've got the tolerance, we've got the capacity, we've got the strength to be able to do this. Right? So, we would now play with those offerings and say, okay, can we lift this up? Right? Which is part of dead starts and part of starting strength. The dead shifts is going to be still, you're shifting it from a dead position now. So instead of just moving it up in a field of gravity, you're taking a mass and you're shifting it through a field of gravity in whatever vector you want to go. And so the dead shift is more the scenario where I'm going on vacation and I've got to take my luggage out of the trunk, and when I get into the plane, I got to take it into the overhead. And then you see often people struggling when they're getting to their destination. They stand up after sitting for how many hours, and then they've got to go and navigate this, large mass out of the overhead compartment, and they struggle with it. Right? That is a shifting pattern, and it's a dead shift. They have to do this and organize this task from a dead position and from an awkward position. Right? Now, the farmer would be able to do it, no problem. He'd probably be able to take, or she'd be able to take 2. But we see a lot of folks really struggle because we don't necessarily challenge ourselves that way anymore because our environments of life have changed, and we don't really organize ourselves for dead shifting in the gym, although I think we should.
Yeah, so lack of neuromuscular control, lack of tissue tolerance. Why? Because we're not exposing ourselves to that.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that we want to add to the story of deadlifting is to say, okay, let's do some basic linear ones, straight up and down. But then we say, can we do so in variable positions?
Even kneeling, right?
There's so many different postures that we can start from.
We'll go through a bunch in a session.
And then also taking mass and moving it through a field of gravity. So, for example, that same one that we had before, instead of driving it up, we might take it and drive it across through a field of gravity, taking it from here and then taking it across and back and starting from that position. So,
and super important that you let it go, right? Because a lot of people just hang on to it, and that's not the dead start anymore, right? So letting it go and then going and interacting with it again, that is where you're overcoming rushing.
Right. That's where you get the benefits, by definition, of deadlifting and dead shifting,
which is starting strength. So in that session, we'll be kind of discussing this, and we'll be going through myriad exercises and strategies on how to do this. So we're really excited about this because I think that it's a narrative that really hasn't been spoken about in that context before. It certainly has been discussed in many forums, but particularly not in this context. And we're just really happy to showcase some of the elements of it.
Yeah. And another form of strength that we're going to be talking about is agile strength, right? And specifically using the tool ViPR PRO.
Yeah. So we talked about different forms of strength. So if you look at the Verkhoshansky, Mel Stiff kind of classic strength narrative, there's 6 different definitions of strength, right? So we have max strength, which is volitional exhaustion, 1 RM. We've got absolute strength, which is more than 1 RM, which is typically done when we override the inhibitory mechanisms of motor unit recruitment, right? So in the opportunities of peril, like the child who's stuck in the car and the parent who rolls over the car, when you release norepinephrine, those fight or flight responses, they typically override the inhibitory mechanisms of motor unit recruitment. Because at that point, we don't care about safety of our bodies as much as our child in our car.
Right.
So that's absolute strength. We can't train for it, but we can. In other words, you can't achieve that until you're in the situation. But when you're in that situation, you want the tissue resiliency to be able to handle when you rev that engine that hot, right? So you need kind of that architectural robustness, which is why most personal bests and world records fall in competition. That is when live bullets are happening. That's when, arousal and, anxiousness and, all those catecholamines and all those hormones are released and that's a heightened state. We typically can achieve more. So that's kind of absolute strength, max strength. We have strength endurance, which is the repeated task of contraction. Starting strength, we talked about with deadlifting and dead shifting. What am I missing here? Strength, and there's a relative strength, which is per our body weight, and then what we might call agile strength. And we've often used the analogy of the farm kid versus the gym kid. The gym kid is offering a very mechanistic approach of repetitive stress. The farm kid's more random, right, in their associations with load. And so what they typically have is agile strength, right? And what we want to do is change the position, change the speed of motion, because it starts to reflect a different adaptation to the connective tissue, to the motor unit recruitments and how they're recruited, and then to the organization of muscle fiber typing as well. And all of that is important. And I want you to think about not agile strength just for the athlete. Agile strength is something that we ought to train when we're 15 and when we're 95 and everything in between, because we need to offer that input so we can get the right adaptations from the individual.
So with that being said, agile coming from agility, meaning that we're going to be challenging individuals with an ability to start, stop, and change multiple directions, oftentimes, which, again, if I'm crossing that street and I can't stop myself or speed up when I need to, I'm in trouble.
That's on the regular. So that's an awesome analogy, right? How many ACLs are ruptured when I stepped off a curb that I didn't realize was there, right? Or Achilles. Yeah, right. So I'm not used to changing speed. So that's in the everyday scenario. The athletic scenario is the same thing, right? If I'm playing football, gridiron football, and I'm a running back, acceleration speed is important when I reach the second level of defense, right? So full out, just linear speed, that's breakaway speed. That's when I reach the secondary. But in order to get the secondary, most good running backs have to stop quicker and change directions quicker than their opponent can. And that is about deceleration. That is typically what allows them to get to the second level of defense. And then where they're linear. What do a lot of athletes train? Acceleration, right? Great, top end speed. What do they test at the combine? The 40. Right. That's great for breakaway speed. My view would be, can you also stop and change directions quicker in life, crossing the street, or at the elite level, right? Or anywhere in between, because that is layers of agile strength, right? Regressed for us individuals and progressed for the elite athlete.
So what we were thinking was, well, if I take traditional agility drills, for example, a shuffle pattern where you're starting, stopping in the frontal plane, we would have to recognize that agile strength would mean that can I sustain certain positions while doing that particular task, having enough strength to be able to maintain those positions, but still be very quick, still be very agile while performing that task. So like an example would be to take, your traditional frontal plane shuffle pattern, but then maybe we pre-position a mass off a midline. So now I'm here. So now I'm going to learn how to stabilize this, hold this here, which requires strength. And then can I move my feet as quickly as I can, right? Starting and stopping or doing some sort of frontal plane. We could do sagittal plane, transverse plane. We would throw in the different planes of motion as we start with just learning how to stabilize a mass off of our midline.
And that's beneficial for, I think, if we think about proper regression and progression strategies, this is an important thought process for all of us to go through, particularly with this odd position, or what we might call pre-position loading. We basically move our body and our hands are fixed, which is kind of completely different than what we typically do in the gym, which is our bodies are not moving and our arms and legs are moving around us, which is good. And it's essential and we need it. It's just not all we need. We need more than that. And so this thought process really allows us the authenticness of inputs to allow adaptations that can transfer into life and activities very well, right?
So we'll be exploring all kinds of different strategies on agile strength. We're also going to talk recovery. And so we were having a discussion about how a lot of
let's be honest. We were talking about how is that one of the last sessions of Saturday?
That's one of the last sessions of Saturday.
Yeah, actually, that's pretty good because recovery is typically coming at the end of something. So for those folks that are thinking about skipping out early, I would highly recommend that you rethink that, because one of the last sessions that we're going to do is the recovery piece. And I think it's something that, as we all know, we're starting to hear more and more about.
Yeah, well, if you look at we first go to athletes, and we adore the athletes that have sustainability, other than just their athleticism to be able to do what they need to do, right? So we were talking about Tom Brady and how he's in his 40s, and when you hear, he's got his new book out, you hear a lot about athletes now, not just about how they train, but how they rest, and how so much of a program is developed around their recovery and to recover well. And so with that being in mind, what are some things that we want to consider when we're developing these recovery programs?
So if I'm honest, I would say, I think that if we look at our industry, the recovery piece, the programming for recovery is new.
Yeah.
I don't know that we know how to do that as an industry quite well yet,
right?
Because it's new, right? There's a lot of research, there's a lot of claims that may be evidence-led, but not yet evidence-based, right? Which is suggesting that there's not any longitudinal studies that have been done yet. So this evidence-led phenomenon, or just these overt brash claims that are being made relative to what it can do, because I'm a sample size of one and it worked for me, therefore it should be working for everybody. That is a slippery slope, and we're kind of in that realm right now, right? Because there's not a lot of structure around it. So, and to your point, if we look at Tom Brady, if you take a look at Roger Federer, if you take a look at Serena Williams, they ought to be done in their careers. And they are killing it right now. You know, Tom Brady is legitimately in the discussion for the MVP, as he should. Federer is what, number 1 and 2 still in the world? Legitimately, right? On his points, he's ranked number 1 or 2. And then Serena Williams, if you go back, to last year's Australian Open, she won the Australian Open with a child in her stomach. I think that is super cool on so many levels. So when you look at that, your clients, the individuals that come to see the fitness professionals, are going to see these stories. And what they're going to say is, how are they doing so well? And what we're starting to glean, and what they're starting to say is, they are engineering recovery. They're engineering it. So just as important and just as specific and just as kind of detailed as they are in their workouts, their stress sessions, they are also just as detailed and just as pronounced on what they're doing from a recovery perspective. And what that now is starting to do is that message is going to flow out to who? The end consumer. Those individuals are going to come to you as the fitness professional and say, what are they doing? And I think if we just say, well, they're just, a recovery session is just working out less, right? Which is not the case. If I'm an endurance athlete at the elite level, and I'm typically riding 100 miles on a Saturday, a recovery in my mind may be, I'll do 30 miles on the bike. That's recovery for me.
Right.
And I understand the perspective of that relative to what you're used to, but that is not recovery, right? And what we need to do is engineer parasympathetic tone, vagal tone. And with our good friend, Brandon Marcello, we've batted this conversation back and forth for the better part of about a year and a half. And we've organized a structure that Brandon was really influential in engaging in, and really helped us develop it. And we're going to showcase some of those elements in this particular session. If you are at all interested in recovery, and the next element of our fitness industry, the athletic kind of training, general population training, older adult training industry, and how to properly program an individual, you're not going to want to miss this particular session, because I think it's vital not only to what we do with individuals, but to the timing of what's out there in the general narrative right now, which is what are people doing, how to engineer, and how to program recovery sessions.
Yeah. So we got to go. We got kids to
Is there any quick questions? I don't know.
But we'll take a look at some questions. In the meantime, we'll be at Ideal World. We have a booth. ViPR PRO has a booth.
Yeah. Come say hi.
We've got some 4s, 6s, and 8s. We have what? How many?
We're going to have 100 there, and they will be for sale. So for some of you that want a kind of discounted rate, because when I say they're used in one session, so they're not really used. But you can pick them up. You can take them with you. You can save on shipping charges and also save on a show discount, which a lot of people ask me about. And so, yeah, just come say hi, and we'd love to kind of connect with you guys face to face. I don't know if there are any questions or comments or.
Nope, I think we're good.
Just comments.
got Johnny Sinclair. He's out in Belgium right now doing our IOM mentorship.
What time is it there?
It's got to be what time is it now? It's 8-9 hours ahead. So it's 8 or 9 o'clock. Go to bed, buddy. You got a big day tomorrow. And then and Tim also gave us a shout out as well. So greetings from San Diego. I'm rooting for Belgium in the World Cup as well as Mexico.
I was going to ask you about that. So how far are they going? This is your prediction right now.
Mexico?
Yeah.
Well, in my mind, they're going all the way.
Well, they're going the knockout. They're definitely going knockout round.
Well, they got to beat. If they beat South Korea in the next game, which they should. No offense to South Korea, but you guys didn't look good against Sweden. So if you guys have that same level of performance, Mexico will handle you no problem. And that means 2 wins. We're going to be in for the next round. And then it'll be interesting if we get first place. That means we probably don't play Brazil in the next round. If we come in second in our group, then we end up probably playing Brazil. So I'd rather play Brazil later on in the tournament when they're nice and tired and thrashed.
Okay. Did Canada make it? I think 86 was the last time we made it. So
Canada has a soccer team?
Thanks a lot, guys.
See you.
Yeah. See you at IDEA.